In this episode of Rslash's Credit, we check out former anti-vaxxers. What caused you to change your mind? Let's get into it. Not me, but my nonna. She's always been into oils, healing rocks, potatoes and socks, all that weird stuff. When I was sick, she would give me a bath and run her hand right above my skin, from head to toe, to draw out the sickness. When my youngest cousin was born, she practically moved into my aunt's house and went everywhere with them. When she took him to get his shots, my nonna started fussing with the pediatrician and he just talked. All he did was explain stuff to her, and she finally understood how baptism she sounded. She still firmly believes that my cat is gonna steal my firstborn's breath, but we are working on it. Not me, but my cousin. She was extremely anti-vax for most of her life, and she refused to vaccinate her kids when they were born. Her second baby caught whooping cough, passed it to her first kid, and they both almost died. According to her, nearly losing her kids made her realize that she was an idiot for not vaccinating them. I read an article about a mom who changed her view on vaccinations because of how radical the anti-vax groups were. A lot of them were anti-gay, anti-abortion, and so crazy about all of it. Pro the dumbest stuff, like oils, pushed the agendas of things that were obviously false. It made her step back and change her entire outlook on the anti-vax movement. I wish I could find this article. It was pretty interesting. Probably on Facebook. But she made great points against them. Kind of boring, but I have a whack job grandmother who believes in all the pseudoscience health BS. Crystal healing, electromagnetic communications cause cancer, vaccines are bad, eat apricot pits to cure cancer, the whole 9 miles. When I was a kid she tried to teach me all of this stuff like it was gospel, and I believed her, because I was a kid, and why would my grandmom be wrong about something? Unfortunately for her, the minute I turned like 7, I got a huge hyperfixation on biology and quickly learned that all the stuff she spouted was utter BS. I'm autistic, and I was like the stereotypical autistic kid, where they just know a crap ton about one particular subject, and devour any kind of learning material related to it they can get their hands on. I'm actually still like that, except now I can get a degree for it. It was not hard for me to realize that none of the things she believed made any sense, even as a kid. My now wife was an anti-vaxxer. I generally go with what she says most of the time, because I cannot be bothered to argue. However, when we were discussing getting married and having kids, I was surprised at how strongly I felt about. I was prepared to walk away from the love of my life, rather than not vaccinate. I gave all of the reasons. I'm from a third world country, and she is European. I have seen too much shit from a lack of vaccination program to sit on the fence on this. She came around. When our first was born he was quite ill. I don't think we were in danger of losing him, but just that tiny bit of danger reiterated the point of protecting them and others from illnesses. My wife is now more on top of the vaccination dates for our kids than I am. A friend of hers had a baby recently and expressed some anti-vaccination sentiments. My wife calmly told her that not only would she be putting her own kids in danger, but that she would be weaponizing her child against others. Quite a turnaround. My mum told me last week, when we were talking about a COVID-19 vaccine, that she nearly didn't have my brother and I vaccinated. I was shocked, because she was a nurse for years and years, and she now stresses the importance of getting our yearly flu vaccinations and pushes my needle-phobic dad to get his. Basically, when she was doing her nurse training back in the early 70s, she did a few weeks on the only ward in the country at the time for people with profound and multiple disabilities, PMLD. The majority were born with PMLD, or had them as a result of oxygen deprivation at birth, but she was told that a handful of them developed them following vaccine injury. Not sure if this is a medically accepted term, but those are the words she used, from a single bad batch of vaccines for measles and rubella, I think. By the time my brother and I were born in 1988 and 1990, she was still affected by what she'd seen back in the 70s, and although she'd seen the progress in vaccinations and there were no more reports of these bad batches of vaccines, she didn't allow them to give us our first vaccine doses on time. It wasn't until my aunt, also a trained nurse, showed her the latest stats and research about vaccines, that she reluctantly decided to have us vaccinated. I was 1 year old at the time and scheduled for the MMR jab. It was the Mr. Vaccine that she was told caused these vaccine injuries, and she was very reluctant to go ahead with it, but ultimately agreed that both my brother, 2.5 at the time, needed to catch up on all our vaccines. She didn't take us to get them, she sent my dad instead, again, needle phobic, and he and I apparently cried the whole time. She told me that she'd glad she decided for us to get the vaccines as we've been mostly healthy since then, and if it hadn't been for our aunt we might not have ever been vaccinated. I joined the military very young, 17, and immediately thrown into a gauntlet of vaccines. It had some adverse effects with some of us, short-term, mild effects. Later, when being deployed overseas I got another round along with what they called NARC. Nerve agent antidote. The rumor mill and disinformation within my unit went in overdrive, basically suggesting that the NARC killed rats and not tested on humans, etc, etc. Basically, I hated and mistrusted the government and no one was going to stick that shit in my kid. Most of the medical community I interacted with were not the best at compassionately explaining the reality of the situation. I finally came across a really good pediatrician who treated his children and their parents like human beings, and he sat me down and spelled it all out in a way that did not belittle me. I had a phase in my early 20s where I hopped on the alternative everyone wants to secretly poison you train. Mostly because of some people that influenced me that time, and it's fascinating how easy you can slip into that mindset, mostly because it is indeed partly true. Like Big Pharma or other mostly money motivated people / companies do actually do a lot of shit that is not helping people, but quite the opposite. But it's not like single doctors or scientists want that. They mostly want facts and the truth, and for people to gain knowledge. An education with simple medical basics quickly made it clear to me that a lot of anti-vax and all the other shit people believe is either total nonsense or only a small part of the truth that ignored anything else from a medical standpoint. There is a reason why there are rules in place to determine if a study can be taken as meaningful, because if you only know part of the truth it's easy to mistake plain coincidence or correlation for causation. But I think with these hardcore conspiracy theorists it has nothing to do with facts or truth, it's about their mindset, that anybody is out to get them. They are basically a constant victim to their own mentality. For the record, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I wanted to comment on another poster's story. As a child, I got most of the childhood diseases because they had yet to develop vaccines for them. We were among the first children to get a polio vaccine, for example. Many years later, when I enrolled at a public university, I was required to show proof that I was immunized against these diseases. Since I had contracted some of them, it was fairly certain that I was immune to them. But I never had mumps. They are unpleasant for children, but dangerous for adults. I had the titer tests done, and it turned out that, even though I never caught them, I was exposed just enough to develop the antibodies. The other author found that he had no antibodies to any of the childhood diseases. My point is that through the randomness of exposure, some people never get sick, but develop immunity anyway. This is not a reliable way to develop immunity, since exposure to a live virus can easily result in an active case of the disease. Typically, a vaccine uses a weakened, or dead, version of the pathogen, just to give the immune system something to recognize and develop antibodies against. So it would appear that many people were vaccinated without a needle. They won that particular lottery if they never developed any symptoms. Thanks for watching this video. See you next Friday on another Rslash Credit.